Mr. President.
Senator from Iowa is recognized.
I believe whistleblowing in the federal government should be protected and encouraged. People in the executive branch of government that are working there every day want the federal government to enforce the laws the way they're written and spend money according to that law. And when they see something is not right in government, they have a responsibility to blow the whistle and tell somebody, and hopefully they work with the immediate superiors, but a lot of times they don't get any respect for the shortcomings of government that they expose. Eventually, they come to Congress, and at that point are covered by whistleblower protection legislation. And if we want to continue the good work that whistleblowers do to expose wrongdoing in government, particularly fraud, waste, and abuse, we should make sure that the whistleblower laws are faithfully followed. One aspect of whistleblower protection is to make sure that everybody in government knows about whistleblowers and the protection that they can receive. One aspect of that is what we call anti-gag rules that need to be followed. So I'm here to speak about my efforts to ensure that the federal government complies with all whistleblower laws. Unfortunately, the government has made efforts to gag whistleblowers before they can make legally protected disclosures, including to Congress. The illegal conduct has happened no matter which political party controls the executive branch of government. That's why I spearheaded successful efforts to get what's called anti-gag provisions enacted. I worked for decades to make it the law. And I've worked to ensure that both Republican and Democratic administrations comply with that law. Congress has a constitutional responsibility to ensure the laws it passes are followed. In 8th grade civics or high school government classes, our students study about the checks and balances of government. Congress not only has a responsibility to pass the laws, they have a responsibility to make sure that the executive branch executes those laws as well. We have not found that followed in practice for these anti-gag provisions. The anti-gag provision requires all federal agency non-disclosure policies, forms, or agreements to notify employees of their right to blow the whistle to Congress, to an inspector general, or to the Office of Special Counsel. Appropriations laws also prohibit federal funds from being used to enforce non-compliant agreements. Nevertheless, federal agencies amazingly still violate the anti-gag provisions. That failure not only has a chilling effect that discourages whistleblowers, it also happens to be illegal. I've conducted long-standing oversight to ensure that federal agencies comply with this law, and I've held them accountable when they fail to do so. For example, 2013, I asked 15 executive branch departments about the inclusion of the anti-gag provision in their non-disclosure agreements. At the time, only the Department of Treasury, out of those 15 executive branch departments, was in full compliance. I forwarded my findings to the Office of Special Counsel, and in 2018, they issued updated guidance to all executive branch departments about including anti-gag provisions in their non-disclosure policies and agreements. In March of 2024, I wrote to 74 inspectors general requesting they check on their parent agency's compliance with the anti-gag provisions. To date, here are my findings from what I wrote to those 74 inspectors general. 45 inspectors general reported they completed their review. Of those 45, 6 inspector generals reported their parent agency was in full compliance. Of that 45, 22 inspectors generals said their parent agency made updates to comply with the law, and 6 said that those corrective actions are ongoing. So, positive changes have been made. Whistleblowers are better off because these agencies are doing what they can to comply with the non-disclosure gag rules. But there are outstanding responses, and therefore more work must be done. This senator intends to ride herd on the government about making sure that whistleblowers are protected and get rid of anti-gag policies. Or get rid of gag policies, I should say. One example from my investigation, 10 inspectors general reported their parent agency agreed to make changes, but had yet to implement them. Another 7 of the inspectors general who conducted a review responded that their parent agency was non-compliant, but they didn't say if their agency agreed to update their policies. Another 7 inspectors generals responded that they were taking the request under consideration or planning to conduct a future review. It is a no-brainer that they ought to take that review, and I'm asking them what is the hesitation. So I have a responsibility to follow up with them. Another 8 inspectors general responded that the anti-gag law didn't apply to their agency. So I'm looking into their position that they took in response to my letter and ensure that their point that they aren't covered by the anti-gag law is correct. 14 inspector generals gave the stiff arm to those of us in Congress, ignoring what we asked for them to do, and as a result, they failed to provide a substantive response, which included inspector generals for the Central Intelligence Agency and the Export-Import Bank. That failure to respond is a disgrace. Inspectors general ought to be the tip of the spear when it comes to transparency in government. Transparency and accountability are not a partisan issue. Federal agencies can't conceal their wrongdoing behind illegal non-disclosure policies and related actions. Whistleblowers are critical to exposing waste, fraud, and abuse within government. Government officials at the top don't know everything that's going on below them. That's why whistleblowers ought to be listened to. They benefit the government carrying out its constitutional responsibilities, and it surely benefits the taxpayers. I encourage my Republican and Democrat colleagues to join my efforts to ensure all administrations, whether Republican or Democrat, comply with whistleblower laws. Rest assured, my oversight will continue, and so will my fight for whistleblowers. I yield.